Welcome, everyone. I'm Katie Capuzzo, Director of Community at Wise, and together we're a global community dedicated to empowering the next generation of women in sales. Huge thanks to our partners for making events like this possible, and special thanks to Pendo for sponsoring today's event. We are going to be chatting about the importance of being an inclusive leader and how creating an inclusive environment fosters growth and performance amongst teams. And joining me in that conversation is Shelly Berkowitz, Head of Customer Education at Pendo, and Kelley Shirazi, Director of Global Sales and Customer Success, formerly at GitLab. So, Shelly, I'll hand it over to you first to tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Katie, for having me, and I'm excited to be on this panel with you, Kelly. So I have been leading and managing teams for over 20 years. I've kind of run the gamut in my experience, working in the dot-com boom and in for very large companies, 50,000 plus in very singular industries and in broad-based industries. So through it all, my kind of common theme has been, being in the space of education and in training. So most recently, I joined Pendo about 4 years ago to build the customer education program. And so, yeah, it's been an exciting time, and I'm very happy to be here to share some of those experiences with you.
Excited to learn from you. Kelley, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So just briefly, I spent the majority of my career in sales. Part of that was sales leadership, where I kind of started to cut my teeth on what it meant to be a leader, especially in technology. I found that my true love was in enablement. And I think you'll find most sellers who make that pivot from sales into enablement will say, I was organically doing enablement in my role as it was. So I made the formal shift and stayed within the DevOps space and technology. And most recently, I had the privilege really to lead a team of program managers at GitLab who ran programs for sales, customer success, renewals teams, professional services. And I learned a ton while I was there. So I'm really excited to talk about inclusive leadership today.
Perfect. And thank y'all for joining us. These ladies are both on the West Coast, so it's early in the morning for them, and they're excited for this panel as we all are. So thank y'all for contributing. The chat is looking like it's having a bit of an issue this morning. So if you have questions throughout, as always, drop them into the Q&A box, which is just at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to that during the Q&A portion. If the chat picks up throughout, I'll ping everyone in the group, but for now, at least just drop those questions into Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. Let's kick it off with a question for both of you. And Shelly, we'll start with you. What does inclusive leadership mean to you, and why is prioritizing this type of management style so important for leaders today?
Yeah, I mean, inclusive leadership, I think is, creating spaces where people have a voice, and they, can show up and contribute, but regardless of, excuse me, their, the experience level or the kind of scope of responsibility that they have within the team, that they play a vital role, actually in, helping the team fulfill its mission, and helping when the team fulfills its mission, then the company is better off and able to do, what it's setting out to do. So, I think that I think of when there are people who are on my team, and they're, working with me at a company, that they're there for whatever period of time that they are, on the journey of their careers. And so what I want them to be able to do is maximize, you know, kind of the skills that they bring, and uh, do all that they can do at the time that they're there within the company. So, creating a space where people feel like they can contribute, that they can share those ideas, I think ultimately is, creates a better space for us all.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Kelley, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was very well said. Thank you, Shelley. I feel like inclusive leadership is about creating, like you said, space for people to bring their whole selves to work, right? Regardless of their identity, perspective, being able to have those open, honest, and transparent conversations. I tend to focus on getting to know people as individuals and understanding what motivates them. And that helps me to calibrate my leadership style to get the best out of them and so that they feel like they're producing the best. As an example, I had a couple of folks on my team who preferred to have a little bit more feedback and positive validation, and that made them feel like they were really being productive and doing a great job. And then I had other folks on my team who really just kind of wanted to be left alone and let them do their thing autonomously. So shifting my leadership style to calibrate to those individual needs, I think helped create trust and open up that space to have honest conversations. I think it's super essential to have a diverse team because then you can innovate faster. You've got a diversity of thoughts, opinions. You don't fall into group think, right?
Mhm.
So there's always going to be somebody on your team who surprises you with maybe a curveball that you hadn't thought of before. So I feel like it's an imperative really to have diverse teams if you want to get the best innovation and results.
Mhm. Along those
Yeah.
lines, when you have people on your team maybe that are newer or you're bringing on a whole new team altogether, getting that pulse check to your point of like what motivates you is important. I want to know A, how you do that to begin with. Do you have people complete like a UX doc or do you just have one-on-one conversations? And then separate from that, are you doing check-ins if you've had someone on your team for a longer period of time to make sure you're still, that their preferences haven't changed?
Mhm. Yeah, so the way that I do that is, like you said, through one-on-ones. And there's always a personal component to a one-on-one and the professional component. So I always want to do a check-in, see what's good, how are things going, what's happening, to the degree that they're comfortable sharing what's going on in their worlds. And then one of the techniques that I want to carry forward with me at GitLab was we had a running one-on-one note stock that was shared. So we could always go back and revisit and pull things up on the agenda so that issues didn't fall through the cracks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could add to that too, Katie. So one of the things that I think is important, to what Kelly is saying that, obviously everybody's different and, and how they work and what they need is different. And so whenever I'm working with a group of people, new people joining my team or if I'm joining a new team or we're building a new team, is really spend time, just as Kelly's saying, with people one-on-one, but really to be really deliberate in talking about preferences. And so, what is it that motivates you? What is it that, you're looking to do next? And some people know, right, that path and the place that they want to go, and they're really driven to get there. And others, they really know what they like to do or the places that they want to explore. And so just, having an open conversation about that and also talking through, where do you excel? Like in what kind of space and in what kind of, support or not support? Like, do you want to have a lot of autonomy or not? And so you have to find a balance. But I think again, like every time, working with a team, having those kinds of conversations, I feel like starts off the space and just, sets the tone for it being, the kind of conversation and the kind of like relationship between a manager and employee that you'll have. And I think like as a manager myself, like, I want that feedback too. And I want them to know kind of what are the things that I, am looking to get from the work that we're doing at any given time. What are the things that I'm working on? What are the things that I would like feedback on? And I think that that actually kind of sets the tone that it's include like, we're all kind of working and we're all working to improve here, obviously to deliver professionally, but also, to grow ourselves.
Mhm. That feedback loop is so important, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more here in a bit too. And along the line, Shelly, you've had many iterations of management and developing that management style for yourself because you've managed teams the majority of your career. What is your approach to management and influencing team culture?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, my approach is really, again, to be inclusive. I mean, to just kind of get the team, for us to understand why is it that we exist? What is it that we're trying to do? And why is that important to the company? And, uh, really working to include the team in the process of kind of defining that, but also to be revisiting it so that we feel like we can stay connected to, it is, why it is that we're there and why it is that, we matter to the company. And so, then, there's a set of things that we, once we, we really all understand, who we are and why we exist, there's a set of things that we're setting out to do at any given time. And so making sure that people have like, a say and an input, we can get people's input. It doesn't mean that all that input defines where it is that we're going at any given time. We have to vet that out and decide we can't do everything. Like, what are our real priorities? And so I think, bringing the team really along for that process regularly, as much as we possibly can. And that can be really challenging because, again, if you have a global team and it's big and they sit in all different types of places, so there are different ways that you can do it. It's not always that you sit in the same space and you have a conversation and you have the luxury of that. But again, um, you know, helping people understand the why, letting them know where they're going, and then what you're doing and what you're not doing, and then continually bringing them back to that so that they feel again like connected to where you're going. So I'd say my style is, yeah, just one, that being an approach, but the style of like doing that and doing it regularly so that we have a rhythm to how we work into the business.
And along the lines of making sure people know why we exist, I feel like initially that's probably pretty easy to get people on that same page, but over time, they may have ideas that could scope creep or kind of take them away maybe from the original function. So when you're reminding them, okay, let's come back to the core here of why we exist, how do you still make them feel heard and that their ideals are valuable, also while kind of nudging them back into the direction they need to go?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that it's really, I mean, well, again, that actually happens all the time because, organizations are really dynamic things and they're always evolving and changing. And so, we're always working to optimize. And so sometimes it means that people move over here and people move over there, or we change directions or we stop doing things. And I think it's really, again, yeah, it comes back to like helping people understand, the rationale and the reason. And you might not agree with it, but at least if you understand, the intent behind it, there are people who are continually working to try to, make the organization succeed and fix the problems, and new ones pop up all the time. So yeah, I think that it's yeah, just kind of following the same principles, but looking at if there's, for example, an organizational change, what was the reason behind it, but also like what are the opportunities that it presents for us too, and not to actually, be Pollyannish about it and that, everything is always great, but really, every time there is a change and there isn't a period of adjustment, it also presents, new opportunities for doing things or looking at them differently. And so, yeah, I think that it's, a continuous process of going through and kind of recalibrating.
Yeah.
Well, Shelly, there's two things that you said that I want to drill into a little bit because I think they're super important. The first one is co-creation, and the second one is showing the team how they are working towards the larger um, goals of the organization. Co-creation is huge. And like you said, Shelly, sometimes not everybody gets a say in it, but the more buy-in you get through co-creation and having those transparent conversations, the more psychological safety you create on your team. So that's a huge component, I think, of inclusive leadership. And then the second thing was helping them to see the bigger picture. One of the things that we did at GitLab that I thought was really helpful to the team is, I would summarize all of the work that they'd done in a quarter, and I'd relate it to the top level OKRs. So they could see very clearly, hey, your work is rolling up to this top level company goal. What you do has value because sometimes it can feel a little bit thankless to be in an enablement role with so many work streams coming at you, and it just never feels like things are good enough. But when they can see that direct alignment, I think that increases their sense of value on the team. So that was a really helpful technique that worked for us.
Yeah, that's great examples. Thank y'all for sharing that. And I do think it's helpful to kind of keep even your own goals and priorities in check when you know those larger company goals and how it immediately feeds into that. Because to your point, it can be thankless every day, especially in a remote setting. You're by yourself a lot. It can feel like you're in your own little bubble. So to have that reminder is huge.
One of the things you said, Katie, too, was like about, sometimes if there are things that people want to do or that they're kind of going off and it's veering in a different direction. I think it's like, it's great when you have people who are really invested and they have lots of ideas. Some you can't act on them all. And so I think it's, acknowledging, right, that there are ideas. We keep in my team like a running list of like kind of our, what we're working on now, what we may do next, and what is possibly for us to kind of consider at a later date. But nothing's being lost. And sometimes we want to move things around. But I think kind of coming back, it's like people don't feel dismissed. They don't, we there's a place, and it might be that, that is a great thing. It's not a now thing. It's a let's wrap up what we have because it's most critical for us to do. Others might be waiting on us, customers might be waiting on us, but we'll get to it. And so, yeah, I think it's just not kind of batting things down, but having, a place for things to go.
Yeah, that's a great idea to have that running list going that you can refer back to. Kelley, you shared that the jump from IC to management originally brought with it a little bit of anxiety. Can you tell us more about that and then why you ultimately made the decision to take on a leadership role?
Sure. So I always had the feeling that I wanted to get into leadership, even though the timing wasn't always right. I was a single mom for a really long time, so I needed a job that was a little bit more flexible. But I wanted to get into leadership so that I could create the environment that I wished that I had had in my career. But that definitely came with some anxiety, and some of that is imposter syndrome, but some of it is actually productive anxiety. So you know, am I going to be able to guide my team through ambiguity, right? I'm responsible for their career development. Am I going to be a good enough coach? And I think the thing that I worried about the most was, will I have all the answers? You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially in a super fast changing environment when I had a team that really needed me to provide clear direction. And what I found was that first of all, I needed to take a step back. Nobody can have the answers to everything. And if you carry that vibe with you into your team meetings, what does that say to the rest of your team,
Yeah.
right? Do they feel like they need to have all the answers? Not a great thing to model, right? So taking a step back, focusing on leading with curiosity and empathy, and let's all repeat after me. We listen and we don't judge.
Oh, I love that.
And listen, I wasn't perfect. And I felt like I could explain that to the team in a way that still, I mean, I hope still exuded competence, but also vulnerability. Like, I don't know, team, let me get some clarity on that. And so that's why I made the formal pivot. And I am so, so fortunate to have had an amazing leader at GitLab who just made me feel super empowered, super competent, taught me so much. I still have a way to go, but I feel a lot more solid in my leadership style now, even though there's areas of improvement that I can recognize, and we'll talk about those later. But I think starting from a core of self-awareness is super crucial.
Mm-hmm. Did you have that to begin with in this role or when you initially transitioned into leadership? Or do you feel like you had to sort of check yourself maybe the first couple of months of like, okay, I need to recalibrate here and my mindset needs to be more open?
I think in general, I have a high degree of self-awareness, but that can be helpful and a hindrance because if you get too much in your head
Mm-hmm.
and you start to focus on the areas that you're most concerned about, then you're not actually living up to your full potential. And that's not good for your team to see either.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and seeking mentorship and seeking help from others as guidance, that's the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you didn't carry the burden of I've got to have all the answers. And it's actually very endearing as a direct report to see your manager say, I don't know, because it allows you to not feel like you always have to come knowing everything because you won't. So that's creating an inclusive environment even without directly doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it's like, and together we're going to figure it out.
Hmm.
We'll partner in this process to kind of think it through, to yeah, assess our options, kind of navigate all the unknowns. And yeah, we're in it together.
Yep. Kelley, this is for both of you, but let's start with you. In your experience, how does prioritizing this inclusive environment directly impact team performance and results? Since in sales, a lot of the time it's about the results. So, how do those two go together?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to repeat everything that I said before, but diverse teams drive innovation. They just do. You need to prioritize that. Otherwise, you get into that group think and you're never moving forward. Diversity also can help solve really complex problems from different perspectives, right? So I think that's super important to have a group of people who can provide a range of solutions. I can't think of everything. One person can't think of everything. So we need to have those differing opinions. And I think inclusive teams can adapt better to change and uncertainty. We're all kind of in it together with our unique perspectives. So I hope that answers the question, but that's how I think of inclusive, diversity and why I want to prioritize that on my team. You just get better results.
Hmm. Shelly, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, like prioritizing, I think of like, being inclusive and building diverse teams is, it's a kind of a way of working, and it's a way of being, and it's not at the we still have to do all the things that we need to do. We still need to, achieve what we need to do as a team. We still need to manage performance. We need to still understand like what are the different strengths that we each bring to the team. What are the things that we just like, we're working at, but we haven't yet mastered, or we just aren't good at. And so part of that diversity is like really kind of understanding the various kind of aspects that people bring. But yeah, it's not kind of an either or. I feel like those things, exist. Like we all need to deliver our best and show up and do our work and you know be available and engaged. For our customers and our colleagues, and we can do that in a very inclusive space.
Hmm. And I think one thing you touched on too is the idea of performance and having this trust built with your teams, but then also knowing at the end of the day, we're here to do a job. And so if you're not doing that, tough conversations may need to happen. And if this is similar to what we're going to talk about with feedback, just cut me off because that question is coming. But is there a difference to you in these performance conversations and how you tackle them maybe when you're leading with this trust foundation that you've already built?
I would say, um, I mean, I think that like when you've built trust, people should know, you know, that the input and what you're sharing is coming from, a place of support, and a place of support because you've invested in understanding, what is it that somebody wants to achieve. You've kind of dug in, as Kelley said, like you don't know all the answers. You work together and actually, collectively as a group or as a team with the employee work to solve the problems. And so those, we all need feedback. And I think it's as a manager important for me to actually, ask for it myself too, and to model what that kind of, hearing and receiving that looks like. And so yeah, I think it kind of bleeds over to the other question, but I think that there are, yeah, I think that it's still, setting that foundation and then, having the conversation, but ideally, you're able to kind of really not have all, it be, super complicated for all the different things because, have trust and you've built that trust over time.
Hmm. Perfect. And we'll elaborate more as I'm jumping ahead. So we will not get to the rest of that question. It's a little bit of a teaser for now. Shelly, Pendo recently went through a reorg. How do you maintain stability and keep morale in check during these kind of shifts? And I'm sure that a lot of people on the call have experienced that, maybe currently experiencing it in their role.
Yeah, yeah. It can be, obviously super unsettling. Like, people, part of a team and they work, towards shared goals with that team and build relationships with the people who are a part of that team, and then understand kind of, how things work when they are part of a function or a department. And, sometimes those changes, like I've, instigated changes because it just made sense, kind of given where we are with the business or different kind of challenges or problems or, again, things that we were needing to solve. And sometimes those changes come externally from outside of the team. And so, I think it's, as it's kind of interesting because as a leader, right, you may be feeling some of those, feelings yourself about, how is this happening and why is it happening and how am I going to, manage this through for myself, again, depending on how big it is, but also, thinking about it for the team, like, kind of acknowledging and recognizing that, sometimes it can feel like, the ground is shifting underneath you. Having said that, I think it's important to quickly get to, what, again, as I said before, like what opportunities does this present for us? Like, why is this happening? What did we solve? We made a lot of progress in our team and in our organization. And now we have a new set of goals that we're working to achieve. And sometimes, being organized differently is going to optimize us to get there. So I think helping people really understand that. And then again, seeing what it presents to us that we may not have been, had access to before when we were organized in a different way. So I think it's giving people time to kind of, yeah, work through it, but also understand kind of the rationale for it, and then think through, then where are we going? Kind of given, those other two steps first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful to think about. Okay, Kelley, you've worked at both startups and established orgs. Regardless of company size, there is a real pressure on sales teams, like we've talked about, to continually generate revenue. How do you build psychological safety on your teams when performance is under a microscope?
Yeah, that's tough. I think part of my job as a leader is to remove obstacles and protect my team from the unnecessary noise. And there's a lot of noise going on in the background that they don't need to be involved in the ins and outs, so that they can focus on the priorities that we've agreed upon. Um, it it's a really good reminder that we've created an enablement roadmap. We've gotten buy-in from leadership. This is what we're moving forward with. If we need to pivot, that's great. But now we're going to have a conversation about what's going to drop off. Because the last thing I want is for my team to feel like, we've been working towards this goal. Suddenly there's this pivot, and now we have to completely shift directions.
Mm-hmm.
So having a stable roadmap, having the conversations is really important. And then also creating space for the team to share, here's what's working, here's what's not working. We're under a microscope. There's all this pressure. Why are we building this and what's it leading towards? And we can admit when something isn't working. And I think it's also really big to celebrate the wins, you know,
Mm-hmm.
even incremental milestone wins is huge. So keeping those wins top of mind, and then also helping if we're having difficulty getting through a program or we need a little extra time, being an advocate for the team. So protecting them, removing obstacles, keeping them focused on a roadmap and why we're delivering what we're delivering, even as leaders come down and are looking at us saying, is this helping move the needle? The other huge piece is always come back with data. You know, if you have your data and you can tell that data story, it doesn't leave a lot of room, for folks to say, hey, we don't think you're performing. And you say, well, actually, the numbers play out differently. So that's how I manage that. I hope that answers the question. I don't know, Shelly, have you had any additional success in that area?
I think our pressures are a little bit different, like not being in kind of balancing like, sales and those sales numbers. But I love what you said about like, being sure to look at the data and understand what the data is telling you and using that to kind of yeah, inform not only like help you see what you've done, right, and tell us to kind of articulate those wins, and but also what is that data telling you that might help you determine where to shift as you look at, as you were saying, managing and fulfilling to your roadmap, where to potentially go with that roadmap.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And sometimes you just kind of have to fall back on being directionally aligned, until you can actually build up the data story and just get that buy-in. But yeah.
Yeah. It's really important. It also data and numbers, yes, and also data and just examples. So in this feedback question, we'll talk about it in a minute. If someone's saying, I don't like the way XYZ is happening, or I feel this way, without concrete examples of why those things are happening or what examples made them feel that way, it can be really hard, I'm sure, for leaders to change or to even determine if it's an issue. So that's a great point. Kelley, GitLab has historically been a fully remote first company. So in a remote setting, I am curious the celebrating wins aspect. And if you found a way that really worked, I'm sure it's different for every employee, but how y'all handled that.
Yeah, so we did it in a couple of different ways. We had Slack channels that were for the entire enablement team, so we could really amplify wins there. There are other comms avenues where we could amplify those, and then at team meetings as well. So that was sort of the internal piece, but then we also had the opportunity to amplify those at the leadership level. And we would all work collaboratively on a deck that collated all of the things that we had done and the outcomes. And so we would share that out frequently, every quarter we'll share the results, what's coming, what the roadmap looks like. So continually validating, but also making sure that we get each individual program manager and individual on the enablement team, their work amplified, especially when they've done something really well. And then ultimately, there's always the opportunity for someone to be nominated to attend President's Club. And we have had enablement folks be nominated and win the ability to go to President's
Wow.
Club because their work was so impactful. So there were a lot of mechanisms to make sure that our work was visible. And again, that takes great senior leadership to do that. And we were very lucky at GitLab to have that.
Yeah, that's incredible. I hadn't heard about being nominated for President's Club if you're kind of outside of that pure quota number.
There were opportunities at GitLab for MVP nominations. Yeah.
Oh, I
So.
love that. Okay, as a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, now's the time to drop them into that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We're winding down our questions. But this one is for both of you. And Shelly, let's start with you. This teased question this whole time about feedback. What role does feedback, both giving and receiving it, play in fostering inclusion?
I mean, I think it's really, really like critical and essential. I think that it's really, you know, as I was saying before, when you've created space, we all, you know, want to do our best, right? We all want to, grow in our careers. And the feedback is a gift in that process, and it comes from many different places. It can come from, your manager, and come from your peers, and come from your customers. And so being deliberate as a team and like looking at and being, just not biased about it, but like what are the words and what are they telling me? And how, you know, being, you know, I guess inquisitive about, what might be behind it, what can we do about it? And so I think it allows us to, yeah, just really hear, but also make improvements. And that continuous improvement process is really important because, yeah, I mean, it helps us make our work product better. Obviously, it helps us get better. But I think, kind of understanding that it comes from all different places and all different points. And then for me and my team, making sure that we look at feedback and we're deliberate about looking at feedback on a regular cadence. Um, yeah, so I think it's essential as part of a of an inclusive environment, or creating or being in an inclusive environment, is hearing what others outside you don't live in a vacuum, and hearing what they think and what they have to say, what they think is great and what they think is could be improved.
Hmm. Yeah. Kelly?
Yeah, so I sucked at constructive feedback. I'm not gonna lie. It was so, so hard for me. And the reason why is because I had such a high performing team. These folks were working so hard, producing super high fidelity work, and I didn't want anyone to ever feel beat up. I wanted them to feel like what they were doing was meaningful. And I'm a huge fan of radical candor. Read the book, taken courses, know all about the quadrants. But when it came down to it, it was really difficult for me to give that constructive feedback. As an example, we had someone on our team, super high performing, super high fidelity, but it was unintentionally being experienced in a way that they were unaware of. And it was something that could potentially be a career blocker. We didn't want that to happen. And so I tried giving little bits of feedback here and there, and it wasn't super well received. And what I found was, by not giving that feedback upfront, kindly and directly, what was that saying to my team? That I really didn't care about them at all.
Hmm.
And so the second I shifted that mindset and was like, you know what? I would want somebody to tell me. That empowered me to feel a little bit more confident. And it was still hard if I told somebody something difficult and they cried, which was absolutely fine. I'm a big crier myself, but and I felt bad. So I had to be very conscious of not moving into that ruinous empathy quadrant of radical candor. But that was probably the most difficult part, was to learn how to do that in a really kind and supportive way. But that just little shift of, if you don't tell them, you don't care, that made all the difference for me.
Hmm.
One of the things I also tell like my team, and I remind myself regularly, like if you don't give people the feedback, they don't know. And so it's like it could be something that is like really grating, it's minorly annoying, it's a problem and it gets in the way of everybody kind of getting their work done. And if everybody around is seeing and experiencing it, or maybe if it's in an individual seeing and experiencing it, like then that sits with them, and you haven't given the person, you know, the benefit of actually changing by just not telling them. And
Right.
so, I think it's just, well, like people can't fix what they don't know about. And so you're doing them a favor by at least letting them know about it. And one of the things Pendo, we've really started doing this year, which it's a framework, and I've really I think it's super, super helpful. And it sounds so basic, but really thinking about, as you're giving feedback and you're receiving feedback, there's the what aspect of the job that you're responsible for, all the aspects of your job, responsibilities and scope. And then there's the how you go about doing it. And so, taking time and thinking about both of those things. Am I fulfilling the what? And what is my how? Like, how am I going about doing that? And being, again, thinking it through, and how am I doing in each of those areas? And am I getting feedback in both of those? And in what, where, because sometimes there are people who are great at the what, but it's the how that where they bump into challenges, because they're running through people, and they're and others don't want to work with them, or it's the others. People are very, very nice. People think they're really, really nice, but they don't trust that they're effective, because they don't trust that they're actually going to deliver.
Hmm.
And so I think, yeah, yeah, I feel like I always have a principle of like, yeah, did you let people know they can't fix what they don't know? And then, thinking about, as I said, the what and the how.
Hmm. This is a silly example, but the other day I was on a call and I didn't have my headphones plugged in. And the person was like, "It sounds like you're dropping Skittles into a jar." And I don't know what noise that was. I had a heater going. Maybe that's what it was. But I was like, "Thank you for telling me. Let me find my headphones." And had I not gotten that feedback, I would have just taken all my calls that day, probably without them. So it really does help to have someone speak up. I am curious, in management dynamic, how do you receive feedback and this idea of managing up? Is there a way that you personally prefer your employees go to you with some concerns?
I mean,
Um, oh,
yeah,
go ahead, Kelly.
I think, and Shelly, I don't know if you agree with it. I think that there's a time and a space to open that up. And during our one-on-ones, that's a great place to do it. We also had the opportunity for 360 feedback. And
Great.
that was pretty eye-opening because it's anonymized data, so folks can feel free to really share what they're thinking. And it felt really great. The feedback I got was fantastic. And it really helped me to recalibrate what my team needed. Um, and we made some changes based on their feedback. So I addressed it head on at our team meetings. Here's what I got, here's what I understand, and here's how I'm going to change my leadership style and what I do to make sure that you feel heard and accommodated.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, yeah, just as Kelly said, like, as part of a formal process, but informally. I think about like I have markers in my mind of like I've been working with this person for 2 months, or, we've kind of shifted strategies and we've been going the course for 3 months. And so, checking in with each person, how do you think it's going? Do you, am I providing you with what you need? Do you have clarity? Like, what are areas that you think that it's still too ambiguous, or just kind of probing if there's a bit about there are things that they can give me insight that can help me adjust, but also like we had a conversation about what you need and how you work, like am I providing enough guidance, am I too much in the way, and so I think just as part of it, as Kelly said, a formal process, but also kind of as we evolve and change things, just having these points of check-in. And then also, like, even last week I was having a one-on-one with a team member, and she was bringing up something that she was very, it felt, it was really sensitive to her, and her voice was cracking, and and she was wanting to talk about something and provide some feedback. And I listened and just reiterated and said thank you, thank you for sharing. This is, I know this was hard, it was hard for you to say, and it's hard especially for people to say too. It's like you're giving feedback to your manager who controls, do you have a job or not, and do you get an increase or not, will you get a bonus, you know what I mean, like. And so when you're sharing that, it's like it's hard, and so it takes a lot of courage. And so again, in that case, I just thanked her, and I acknowledged that it was difficult. I could see that it was difficult, and I told her, please, like, I can't fix what I don't know. Share with me, and you can do it at any time.
Mm-hmm. In both of the examples you shared, y'all close the loop in that way by telling the person or the team, thank you for sharing that. This was really important for me to get that. And I think that's a great model to set. So great points all around there. We have had a couple of questions come in. So again, if anyone has questions, drop them in now. A couple questions were kind of similar, so I'm going to combine them into one. If you could boil it down to one piece of advice you have for someone stepping into leadership, what would that be? Or the greatest leadership lesson that you've learned along the way was another way that it's been phrased.
Get a mentor.
That's a great one.
Get a mentor. Yeah.
Yeah. Wise
Ask
has
for help.
mentors. Shameless plug here. If you need a mentor, let us know.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You can't know everything. It's a totally different skill set moving from an IC into a leadership role. And it's okay not to have all the answers, but it's not okay not to ask for help.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I think, and also like, there's, more than you think you do, and you're more capable than you think you're capable, than you may think that you're capable of doing and accomplishing. So trust yourself, and trust your instincts, and step in with confidence. Again, know that you don't know everything, as Kelly said, ask for help. But again, you're not starting from a place where you have know nothing. There's a reason why. Either others trust you, or you applied for something and they said yes, right? You
Mm-hmm.
you bring something, and so that's important to recognize too.
Yep. Great. Another one here is y'all talked about motivating your teams and also individuals, understanding what motivates them. But really tactically, if you've had maybe some back and forth with an employee and you're finding it difficult to motivate them, even in the ways they said they're motivated, like how do you handle that situation?
That's actually a really good question. I think that um, s- uh, sometimes, yeah, there's the things that the ways that people think that they want that they want to work, like they want to be independent, or they want to take the lead on the project. Sometimes it's, are they doing the right set of tasks? Are they doing the right set of responsibilities? And so if in fact, yeah, it's, you have a conversation about what it is that like makes them feel engaged and motivated and things like that, and if things still aren't happening, then I think a next step is to talk about, like, yeah, the tasks, the scopes, the projects, and what it is that I as a manager need to see in order to make sure that you know work is just happening, right? Because we all are, we get paid to do the work and we're responsible for delivering.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways that I tried to get ahead of that conversation, every year, we'll have employee reviews, and we had job frameworks. And so we had a set of competencies that were part of those job frameworks. And so I built into a promotion document and also my one-on-one document an area for folks on my team to kind of fill in how they're meeting those competencies. And if they wanted to get a promotion, how were they meeting the competencies for that next level? And so when we would go through those one-on-ones, they could clearly see, and we co-created this, right? So this was a two-way conversation. So they could kind of see where they were performing well and areas that they needed to kind of work on. And so it should never be a surprise, right? You should be sharing this constantly. And so there may be times where, frankly, you have to rotate somebody out of the business. And that's a kind of a shitty thing to have to do. Honestly, it feels terrible. But if you can get ahead of it, you have documentation, they have clear expectations, and they're still not performing, then you're in having a different conversation. But if you can get ahead of it and they can talk about areas where they need improvement and you can provide them with the resources they need, that's tended to work really well.
Yeah. That's great. And again, it comes back to your suggestion around having data. If you're looking at things side by side, to your point around the core competencies and then what they need to be doing for the next role, I think that's really helpful to see. And it's hard to say, well, I've been doing those things if you can't actually say that you've been doing them. So that's great. Thank y'all so much. This was a really helpful conversation. I think this topic is a big one, so we could probably stay on for another hour diving into some of these specific scenarios, but really appreciate y'all taking the time to be with us this morning.